as I promised earlier, I'm going to take this conversation in another direction tonight, too, as well. I would like to welcome back the Fade to Black, Dr. Robert M. Schoch. Robert, good evening, my friend. How are you?
Yeah, good evening. It's great being here.
It's always good to hear your voice, and
Thank you.
I hope I made you nervous.
You did.
I mean, is it possible? Is it possible for me? See, this is the thing. And this is the honest truth. When you do as many interviews and hangouts as you and I and Rita and Katie have done over the years, the audience gets to enjoy that. So always, the first interview is the same questions that you get asked 1,000 times, right? And you've got to put up with that. But as the interviews go on, you and I are more comfortable with each other, and we can push each other around a little bit, and hopefully, peel back the onion a few layers, and we get to do that. But the other thing is this: when you do that, then we now have the ability to just sit and talk. And that's what I want to do tonight. Can we just sit and talk?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So are you relaxed then?
I'm trying to be relaxed. You make me a little nervous, but No, you're great. You're great.
Man. I remember this takes me back a few years when we were doing a panel together at Contact in the Desert. And you ended up coming out on that panel like 7 times. You remember that? We were doing the count with the audience, remember?
I remember. Somehow I knew you would bring that up.
It was so funny because you were starting to fidget a little bit. You were starting to fidget. But it was great. And see, and again, it's about trust, but the audience gets to go along for the ride when that happens. Yeah. And I really enjoy it. So
I agree.
Let's get straight to a couple of things that you are working on before we start to take off here. You had mentioned to me about a year ago about the possibility and the excitement of a documentary, and that you were involved with Jim Fields, and then of course Jim Fields directed the amazing documentary about the Ramones called End of the Century. And that said to me, Robert, I've always called you a rock star. You got the long flowing locks, and and you were young and crazy, and you were this rock star to me, and you had that image.
Well, thank you.
But Jim Fields, right? Are you a Ramones fan?
Actually, well, I suppose I am if I'm a fan of anything. Yeah, I do like Ramones. And I will tell just a little story here. I was at Yale. I went, and you mentioned this, I did my PhD at Yale University, my MPhil and master's there also. Mm-hmm. So I was at Yale for a number of years. Well, I say a number of years, 4 or 5 years total at Yale. And at Yale in New Haven, there's a place, I think it's still there, Toad's Place. Basically, I don't know, Toad's Place. How do you describe it? It's, a bar, and what do they call that? Where you go and you can hear local bands, that type of thing?
I would call that a college music dive bar.
Something like that. Anyway, it's actually very, very famous.
Right.
And major groups will come through there. I mean, Rolling Stones, I think, have been there, et cetera.
Wow.
So the Ramones came, and a bunch of us all paid, $1 cover charge or something to go see the Ramones. And I have to say it was probably the most fun, the most invigorating, I wouldn't even call it a concert, just show I've seen.
And that was
there
when...
I was, 7 feet from the stage, and Joey's singing away. It was just great.
Absolutely,
it was so much fun.
Now, if this was at Yale, what city is Toad's Place?
New Haven, Connecticut.
Okay, so New Haven.
Yeah, Toad's Place in New Haven, Connecticut. If you look it up, or if people look it up, I mean, it's actually pretty famous, I think.
Now, what year would that have been?
I was in New Haven from 79 to 84.
Whew.
Yeah, 79 to 84. So it was somewhere in that range.
And I
honestly don't remember exactly what year it was. I once tried to figure it out by looking up when Ramones passed through New Haven and when they were at Toad's Place, and I think they were there several times during the time I was there, so it was one of those times.
That's when they were on their game.
Oh, they were great.
Oof.
They it had to be, it was when they were really at, I guess, their height.
You know why? You know why I believe the story? Because you were in college.
Well,
and
because I'm telling you, it's true.
Because you were in college and you don't remember what year. That's awesome.
True. That is true. That is true.
That is
but,
awesome.
They were really good. I mean, they were just really very genuine. It was also, I mean, by modern standards, I think when I think back on it, what they were doing was, well, by modern standards, illegal. What I mean by that is I remember Toad's Place was completely packed. It was pretty much, had to be standing room only at that point because, people wanted to come see them and everyone's crowded in, standing there. You could barely move. And then all the lights go out. So it's totally black when they come on stage. I mean, like I said, I was only, 7 feet or something like that, literally from the stage. I couldn't see anything. And then they go, I'm not going to try to imitate them, 1, 2, 3, and start playing. And suddenly the lights come on, and they just took it from there.
Oh, man. Amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
it was absolutely amazing.
Amazing.
So now that I'm doing a project with Jim Fields, who did the end of the century, the story of the Ramones, incredible documentary, rock documentary. I mean,
how did you end up hooking up with Jim?
He actually contacted me. He said he was interested in what I'm doing and had heard me speak, etc. On YouTube or whatever, and knew, heard through the grapevine, or maybe I'd said it, that I was interested in doing a documentary.
Right.
Yeah, and,
wow.
and I've got to tell you, a lot of people contacted Katie and I about it. All these people come out of the woodwork, so to speak, filmmakers and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not putting any of them down, but you need the right person that you feel comfortable with. And when I saw he had done the Ramones, I said, "This is someone I have to look at."
Yeah, no doubt. And how,
we took it from there. He's just such a great guy.
How does that? That's a very special moment. But if I can ask you, how do you feel at that moment when somebody like Jim Fields is following your work? You didn't know anything about this. How does that make you feel? How did you react?
I was sort of flabbergasted. I don't know. It feels good.
Yeah.
It feels good. I mean, I don't know. I to this day, I don't want to sound the wrong way. I really don't want to sound the wrong way. But Katie and I are driving. We drove from Boston to D.C. to see my father, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We stop at one of these rest stops, and someone comes up and starts talking to me and knows who I am. I mean, I'm not used to it.
Yeah.
I don't take these things for granted.
Now, what you ended up doing, and again, we talked about this a while ago, but you ended up doing a Kickstarter for the project. Now, okay, I want to get into the background of this because this is actually very exciting. Normally, when you announce a Kickstarter, you're starting at zero and you're hoping for the best. In this case, you're doing really, really well. So this is what I want to say.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. And I want to say that we're so appreciative. The Kickstarter, we have the I can't talk. We have the Kickstarter campaign going, and we started 22 days ago, and we have a goal of 50,000. And I'm pleased to say that we have met the goal. We're now at 51,000. Plus. And what that means with Kickstarter, those who are not familiar with it, you have to meet your goal. Otherwise, you don't get anything. Now that we've met our goal, we know that we're really going to, we've made it, but we want to continue going.
Yeah, because, let me, is it okay if I interrupt? Because I just did.
You may interrupt anytime, but I wanted to say one thing, and that is that we were talking about Jim Fields, and, documentaries, putting things together takes a lot of people, and we're just so appreciative of all the people that have been helping us and have written to us. And in fact, some of them will be calling on again probably, because you don't just have one person doing this. You have sound, you have post-production, you sometimes need more than one camera person, you have to lay down soundtracks, you have composition. So there's a lot. I mean, I know you know that, but not necessarily everyone listening to knows that. So we're going to be, we've got other people that we're probably going to be calling on too to get involved with this. So yeah, I'm just overwhelmed by the offers to help and getting back to the Kickstarter, people who have chipped in for it.
Yeah, and there's a tentative working title, which I'm very excited about. It's called "How Old Is Civilization?" Now,
that's what we're calling the Kickstarter right now. Now, what the final title for the documentary will be is to be determined. Maybe it's something like that. Maybe it changes. But when I write a book, for instance, a lot of times, I don't know the title of the book until it's pretty much done.
If I
pledge, how it shapes itself.
If I pledge $5,000 right now, can I name the film?
I don't know if I can give you naming right. But you can pledge $5,000.
I know I could. Because I was thinking about, we could call it like Jimmy's Friend Robert.
Oh, there you go.
$5,000.
That might be the next film. How's that?
So,
but can I put a plug in? So we do have this Kickstarter campaign going. I would love to see people donate to it. And may I put some plugs in for it right now?
I was going to plug for you, but you're doing
plug
so
for me then, and I'll chime in if I need to.
Well, this is what I wanted to say. I don't want you and I to forget this. Even though the goal has been met at $50,000, because this is also Oracle, which is a 501c charity, because of that all of the extra money here you will be able to use for additional research by Oracle, which includes going to Egypt and maybe finding out what's underneath that paw on the Sphinx. I'm just suggesting something right now, just an idea to plant in your head. But that's what I want the audience to know, that yes, it's exciting that the goal was met, but because of the way that this is set up, and this is also Oracle, which is a great research organization, that we can keep this thing going. We can keep it. Let's get this to $150,000. Let's just keep it going.
That would be great. Exactly. And you just said it, but I'll reiterate it. Oracle, which is Organization for the Research of Ancient Cultures, is a nonprofit. It's a 501c3, as you mentioned. So actually, in this case, most Kickstarters, you're just donating to someone's. Yeah, and I'm not putting that down, but you're donating to someone's project. This is to an organization that is a nonprofit, so actually the donations are tax deductible to the extent of the law, as they say, but they're tax deductible. And anything we don't use for the documentary, and honestly, documentaries, we want to do a really good documentary, so things get pricey. You and I were talking before, and I was mentioning to you that just permissions alone in Egypt can cost $2,500 a day and up. That's before you start paying any of the other expenses. So when I say permissions to film, that type of thing. But anything that we have after the documentary is made goes into continuing research, like the paw, like the chamber under the paw of the Sphinx, that can go into further documentaries. I mean, I have big plans. We have big plans.
Now, what's the overall...
The money will all go to very good uses.
What's the overall concept that you and Jim have put together for the documentary?
Well, I was going to say, Jim, myself, and Katie. I want to include Katie in here because she's very much a driving force behind the documentary. This is something that we've been talking about for a long time. So it's a little bit fluid. We're going to be working on it as, we'll be shaping it as we go along, because partly is what can you get permission to do, what can you shoot, etc. But we're certainly going to start in Egypt. We're starting next month when we get to Egypt. We're going to start filming in Egypt. We're going to certainly deal with things like the Sphinx and my work on the Sphinx. John Anthony West, who of course has passed away now. But what we start with the Sphinx pushing back the age of civilization, but we're going to go much further than that. We're going to go with Göbekli Tepe. We'll be shooting in Turkey. Your audience knows Göbekli Tepe well.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when you look at the Kickstarter campaign, you'll see that the first image going to the first video linking actually shows me in front of Göbekli Tepe.
Yep.
But the overall theme is really that there was this cycle of civilization that you and I have talked about. We've spoken about this quite a bit. That goes back to before the end of the last ice age and was then devastated with the calamities at the end of the last ice age. So that's the really overall theme of it, really trying to pull all this evidence together, make the case. I don't like saying this to a certain extent, but I do like saying it to another extent. Mystery of the Sphinx. Do you remember? Lots of people, I hope, will remember Mystery of the Sphinx that John Anthony West and I were involved with back in 1993. Well, that was just about the Sphinx. It was really just about the research at that time, but this is now 25 years ago. My early research on redating the Sphinx, this takes it from there and puts it all together, all the things that have happened since.
I know somebody that could do the voiceover and narration for you, by the way.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
You?
Yeah. Yeah. I like where you're going with that. I was thinking of somebody else, but I like yours better.
Yeah. Do you have someone else you want to mention? You'll talk to me later about it?
I'll audition right now. Robert Schoch is back. Okay. All right.
But I wanted to say, from a practical point of view, if people want to go and take a look at it, the Kickstarter campaign that's live now, and we've got 18 days to go. I don't think you have a direct link from your website.
I've done a couple of things. We have it up in Twitter right now. And
okay,
of course,
great.
If you go to the links over at jimmychurchradio.com for Dr. Schoch, when you go to his website, it's right there, Kickstarter on the homepage.
Exactly, it's right there. It's the first, my wife, Katie, calls it the first promo box.
Yes, that's what it is.
I don't know if that's the proper term for it. But people can go and they can click on it. And I hope that people will see fit to
now, what I dig here
as we move on, make a donation, and there's lots of good rewards. So
yeah, there is. If you do a $500 pledge, you get all of this stuff. But that doesn't. I mean, that's cool. But you get your name as you get your name in the credits.
That's right.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean,
that's pretty cool.
What I think actually that's a great. Otherwise, I mean, for $500,
that's pretty cool.
In the credits of something that I really believe in I believe is going to last.
Well, I'm scrolling through here. How much do I have to pledge to get lunch with you and Katie for Rita and I? I don't see that on the list. It should be.
We will have lunch together.
It should be here somewhere. This is exciting, and there is so much more to do here. Not only for you in life, but the way that this is set up here, the goal has been met, and now the pressure's off. Let's rock this thing for the next couple of weeks, and let's see where we end up. It's very cool, very, very cool. And do let Jim know that I'm ready to do a table read if he needs me involved.
Oh.
I'm right there.
Absolutely.
That's a joke. You're supposed to laugh at that point. He's probably listening. He's probably listening right now, rolling his eyes. But very exciting stuff. Now, this is what I would like to do. When we come back, I kind of want to roll back time with you and get you maybe into an uncomfortable place. And I want to talk about you, Robert. And
you're good at that.
and how we all got here. Well, this is what's most important. So let's set it up for when we come back.
I enjoy it.
Where did you grow up?
Are you asking me now?
Yeah, I'm asking you now. This is the setup.
I was born in D.C. I was born in the swamp.
You were born in
Washington, D.C.
Now, growing up in Washington, D.C., knowing where you are now, okay, that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when you were growing up, 5, 6 years old, what did you think you were going to be?
Oh, when I was 5 or 6 years old? I think I was going to be an artist. I thought I was going to be an artist.
Were you good?
Well, I took art lessons. I enjoyed it, but I don't know. I moved on to other things. But in some ways, I still feel like, what I do is creative and there's an artistic aspect to it.
That's absolutely right. And you walk around with a camera all day long.
That's true. That is true. I love taking pictures.
So
you know that.
I do. And I find that actually very, very interesting. Because if you think about it, you did grow up to be an artist. So let's take a break. Yeah. Let's take a break right here. Our guest tonight is Dr. Robert M. Schoch. I am your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. When we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. I think everybody knows where I'm going. We'll be right back after this. Stay with us. This is Fade to Black. More with Robert after this short break. You're listening to a preview of Fade to Black. To get the full episode, go to jimmychurchradio.com and get our podcast. Click on the podcast banner or sign up in the membership area for downloadable MP3s. Everything commercial free. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Our guest tonight, Dr. Robert Schoch. I just posted up in Twitter the new addition to our family. Rita got this from Carolyn Ford. Her name is Star. She is the most amazing crystal skull. And Rita took these pictures tonight, right before showtime. You can see I'm wearing the same shirt that I'm wearing right now down in the bunker. And look at this crystal skull. Absolutely amazing. Her name is Star. And you can check it out right now over on Twitter. Right there. It's at JChurch Radio. Absolutely amazing. And you can just go to EinsteinTheCrystalSkull.com. The links are up. And go and check out the stuff that Carolyn Ford has. She is absolutely the best. I want to thank Carolyn for doing this for us. Okay. Robert Schoch. This is, okay. Now, you're 5, 6, 7 years old. You have dreams of being an artist. We all did. That's fair enough. Astronaut, pilot, artist, king. We all have these dreams. And but while that was going on, did you have at that age, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, were you thinking about Egypt? Did you have any thoughts of how we got here? Was this part of growing up?
No. I was thinking about Egypt. Definitely, I was thinking about Egypt. I was thinking about ancient civilization, and I can't remember. Now, I was very young. I don't remember what year it was, but I was definitely in the range we're talking about, 4, 5, 6 years old. I remember being taken by my parents. My parents took me to an exhibition in D.C. We were in D.C., and one of the Smithsonian, or maybe it's National Gallery of Art or whatnot, and they had an exhibition of Tutankhamun artifacts. And I still remember that vaguely, but I remember it from when I was very, very young. And I remember being fascinated by one of Tutankhamun's gloves. For some reason, that really fascinated me. Was this bejeweled glove, and
right.
I thought it was really neat. And I remember reading as soon as I could read, and I maybe even before looking at the pictures, books about ancient Egypt and Greece and Rome. Actually, the period that was most fascinating to me when I was very, very young was the Roman. Not the early Roman Empire, but for some reason, the late Roman Empire.
What version of the late Roman Empire? Are we talking up to the Dark Ages?
Yeah, up to the Dark Ages. I was. It's funny how I reflect on it now. because I wasn't thinking exactly so academically back then, but basically the period from about 300 to 500 AD. I found absolutely fascinating with, the decline of the Roman Empire, the split between the Eastern and Western Empire, and what led up to essentially the Dark Ages, which ironically now I'm studying a much earlier period, but a much earlier period where we also have what was a mighty civilization that collapsed.
The thing that fascinated me, and I think everybody else goes through the same thing, when you start to find out the cross pollination of the cultures and their gods and their belief system, when you find out what, Rome, got from Greece, and what Greece, in turn got from Egypt, same gods, different names. Because you learn one side of it, you learn about Hercules or Zeus, and you hear these Osiris, right? You hear these names, but you associate them exclusively with those cultures, not knowing that it was completely shared and passed down and across oceans.
Exactly. And some of these these common stories, these common threads, they go back to the end of the last ice age, before the end of the last ice age. I'm absolutely convinced of that based on the evidence that we now have.
Now we have two. Oh man. Okay, let's go right here. We have to, because you actually can talk about this because of the age that we're dealing with here. But we have two big A's. We have Atlantis and we have aliens.
Okay.
And when you're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, Atlantis and aliens are fair game. We're all right.
Sure,
right?
Absolutely. I guess they're fair game.
Right. And so, what did you think about when you started to hear these stories about, Atlantis, or lost continents, and of course aliens and ET in the movies and everything else? Well, how did that affect you?
How did it affect me as a kid?
Yes.
I was, I will just be honest and straightforward. I was never in the alien camp. I was always in the Atlantis camp, if we could put it that way.
Sure.
I read Plato when I was very, very young, in translation, of course, English translation, but I was fascinated by Plato. I was fascinated by the concept that there were earlier civilizations on Earth. When I say earlier, not just Greeks and Romans and dynastic Egyptians, but I'm sure you and I have talked about this before. My grandmother was a theosophist, so I was introduced to Blavatsky, and I read Isis Unveiled and things like that at a very early age, and was fascinated by the whole concept of earlier, we'll call it primordial races, that type of thing.
Did you read?
I was always coming from that perspective. I never was really in the camp of, and again, I'm not putting anyone down, or I'm just saying, you asked me the question.
Right.
I was never in the Van Doniken type camp, or aliens, that type of thing.
Did you read Chariots of the Gods, though? I mean, that was the...
Oh, yeah, I read it.
That was required reading in the 70s.
Yeah, of course, I read it, but I always took it as the way the original edition phrased it, Chariots of the Gods with a question mark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. What about H.P. Lovecraft?
Oh, Lovecraft?
Yes.
I think Lovecraft's fascinating, but of course, I mean, that really gets more, it's considered fictional.
Well, but when I think all of us now looking back, Blavatsky, H.P. Lovecraft, Chariots of the Gods, and that whole idea, they're kind of connected.
Oh, they're absolutely connected. And there's a lot of cross-pollination, I guess is the way people say it. There's a lot of connections. But you know where I'm coming from. And when I say you know where I'm coming from, because we've talked about this before, ultimately I always follow the evidence. I am a scientist and I was trained that way, but I follow the evidence. But thinking about things, both in a fictional setting, in a speculative setting, I believe can open your eyes to things that you wouldn't necessarily see otherwise. So evidence that you would not necessarily see otherwise. Because seeing evidence is not always easy, especially if you have blinders on. If you have, and one thing that John Anthony West used to talk about this, and you and I knew him very, very well, and you knew John Anthony West.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing he liked to say was that, conventional education dumbs you down. Well, in part what he was saying is it does put these blinders on you, and you only see certain types of evidence, you only interpret it certain ways. And for me to delve into some of the other aspects, whether people want to put it down or not, by calling it a cult or science fiction or total speculation, it can be very enlightening. It can be very opening. But ultimately, you have to get back to the real evidence.
Now, as time
that makes any sense.
It does. And as you started to grow up, early teens, did this outlook, about Egypt and Romans and ancient history, did that continue for you? I mean, we all study things at that age. Things start to get more and more important to us. For you, what was the path doing? Were you going away from the artwork and starting to look at ancient history a little bit more?
Yeah, probably. What I ended up doing, maybe this will answer the question. When I first went to George Washington University, so this is 1979, fall of 1979, if I get my years correct, yeah. I enrolled George Washington University, one of the local colleges, since I was born in D.C. What was I going to study? The first semester, I thought I was going to go into art history because I loved art, and I thought art history would be a good thing to go into, and I really was thinking I would focus on ancient history, ancient art, that type of thing. I already at that point sort of had a scientific bent, so something I was seriously thinking about was going into art history with the goal of becoming some kind of conservator, some kind of, someone who restores ancient pieces of art, puts them back together when they've been found, in rubble or corroded, that type of thing. And that was one of my earliest, should we say, almost adult goals as a freshman. I dropped that very, very, very quickly. But that was my original goal going to college for about 1 month.
So you end up with a BA in anthropology.
Yeah,
right?
Because I was fascinated by all these things. Anthropology at the time, one reason I end up with the BA in anthropology, I also got a BS in geology, and those were simultaneous. I didn't do one and then the other. I was doing both of them at the same time as an undergraduate. Don't ask me how I did that. I don't know. It was a hectic 4 years.
That's pretty insane. That's pretty insane.
Yeah, it was insane. I remember going to, I'm not bragging, I'm just stating the facts. I remember going to see a dean and asking him if I could get a BA and a BS at the same time. I said, oh, no problem. You can do a double major. Don't worry about it. I said, no, I don't want to do a double major. I want a BA and I want a separate BS, but I want to do it in 4 years. And he thought I was crazy. And he told me I had to do all this stuff, and he mapped it all out. And I came back to him 4 years later. I showed him how I did it. And I heard later that they changed the rules so that no one could do it again.
Well, I'm interested.
But being back to what we're talking about, well, you go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted you now.
It's actually your show. On the anthropology side, certainly, here we are in 2019, and what you were learning about anthropology back then and what you know now about society and history are probably two different polarized things.
Oh, very different things.
Right.
if I had said things on exams or in class that I now know, and in fact things that are now accepted by the general academic community, much less the public, I would have failed. I would have been thrown out for silly things. For instance, back then, this is a classic example. When I was in undergraduate college, if you talked about pre-Clovis people in the Americas, just forget it. There was no such thing.
And when you were in school, versus now, but when you were in school, was your focus on the society's, the structure in the ancient past, in the not so far past, or were you dealing with modern society as far as anthropology goes? Yes.
Oh, actually, I was starting to say, but then we got sidetracked. I actually ended up going to anthropology in part because at that time, archaeology was within anthropology, at least at George Washington.
Right.
So, and also physical anthropology. So as part of my anthropology, I took courses in anatomy and human anatomy and human evolution. That I was very much involved in the physical anthropology / archaeology branch of anthropology. Anthropology is a very broad discipline, actually. I took courses in ethnography and ethnology and that type of thing, too, and I found those fascinating. At one point, I thought maybe I'll become an ethnographer, go live with some tribe in the Amazon or in somewhere in the middle of Africa for 3 years and learn scholarly papers about them.
Now
the problem, one of my problems was I always had too many interests.
Well, see, that's what's fascinating when you're able to get archaeology and anthropology rolled into one, and take a focus on the far distant past, because now you learn as an adult. But I want to know what they taught you. And if I was taking an anthropology class and it was rolled into archaeology, I would assume they're going to tell me the secrets about the missing link, right? That's part of what this goal would be, right? Was that ever discussed?
I took a number of courses in human evolution, that type of thing at the time. All of which is totally outdated now because we've learned so much more.
Right.
And there's so many more fossils. But the techniques, the patterns of thinking, the way to logically analyze things, that's not what's outdated from my years in college and graduate school.
Now, did they going back to, and this is my frame of reference, and I think most people have this. The structure that we are taught is Egypt first, 3000 BC.
Yep.
Greek next, 700 BC. Rome next, 400 BC, and then everything else. Right? It's just like that's supposed to be what it is.
That's what it's supposed to be, and of course that's a very Western view. That's a very, one could say biased view. Forgets about the Far East, forgets about
Sumer,
much of the Near East and Sumer,
right.
etc. And it also, it's very Eurocentric, really, or at least Mediterranean centered.
It's really strange, isn't it? But I'm asking you directly. That's how it went down for you, right? At George Washington.
Yeah, that was the classical. I was trained very classically, but everyone was back then.
Right. And how do you feel, looking back, do you think any of your professors and those around them know that it was probably much different, but they couldn't discuss it either in class or otherwise?
I suspect so. But because some of them were fairly open about things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think they were more open-minded, even more so in graduate school when I was at Yale. I've got to say that at Yale I felt that I got a good education in the sense of not the facts, because the facts get added to and get reinterpreted, but how you analyze the facts.
Well, let me.
It was interesting. It was interesting because when I was at in college, undergraduate in particular, but graduate too, we were talking about anthropology and archaeology, that type of thing. Remember, I also got a degree in geology as an undergraduate, and I that's what I went into as a graduate student, geology and geophysics. So that's where my terminal degree is located, in the geology geophysics branch, but I never gave up all the art history and the ancient civilizations. I just sort of kept that as a parallel track that I was following and studying. Never gave that up even as a graduate student. But getting back to your question, for instance, I can give you very specific examples. In geology, the faculty members I had grown up in a different geological era. What I mean by that is thinking. They, in many cases, were old enough that they had not even plate tectonics, the whole concept of plate tectonics,
right,
which there's a lot of controversy about. But many of my faculty members, my professors, had been trained in a pre-plate tectonic era.
Yeah, because we're talking about
huge revolution in thinking in geology in their lifetime.
That's right, because we're talking about 1980 for you. The whole plate tectonics didn't really grab hold until the mid-50s, going into 1960s. So
that's right, going into the 1960s, and still there were a lot of holdouts even in the mid-1960s.
Right.
Really, the ultimate evidence with magnetic striping, that type of thing, I don't want to go off on a lot of technical tangents, wasn't well developed until at least the mid-1960s.
Yeah, that's right.
So I had faculty members who had seen this occur in their lifetime, in some cases after they had received their PhDs.
So what would have happened? Because by 1980, the 12th planet and the conversations about Mesopotamia and Sumer were certainly being discussed a little bit more, not mainstream, but certainly it was out there and it was being discussed in the books and stuff. Yeah. What would have happened if you were sitting in an anthropology class in 1980 and they're discussing these things, Egypt 3000 BC and Greece at 700 and Rome at 4, and you raised your hand and said, well, that may not necessarily be true because Sumer, right?
No, you didn't do that in anthropology class. You didn't do that in an archaeology class. And I'm making a distinction here, and I mean this is a serious distinction. You could be more outlandish, should we say, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but more speculative in geology than you could in archaeology or anthropology. And I think that's actually one reason, maybe subliminal, I can't say it.
Subliminally.
That's what I'm trying to say. And an unconscious level, because I didn't really think about consciously at the time, but that, I think, in hindsight, is one reason I ended up doing my advanced degrees in geology and geophysics, because I found that the geological community was much more open to looking at alternative views, alternative ideas, that type of thing. I'll give you a real example. And it's funny how I just remember these things now that we're speaking about it and we're just having this conversation. I remember both as an undergraduate and graduate student, we would go out, we would look at outcrops, we would look at rocks in the field, that type of thing.
Right.
And it was not uncommon to have, and I can picture in my mind to this day, 3 really distinguished faculty members, sometimes more, but I remember one case, and this was just one of many incidents like this, where you'd have 3 top-notch PhDs. They'd all written books. They had impeccable credentials, and they would in turn each give their interpretation of what we were looking at. And sometimes they were absolutely opposed to each other, almost to the point you thought they were going to get into a fight over it. But it was so enlightening. It was so invigorating. And you didn't dare do that in archaeology classes.
The visions that you probably started to assemble back then. Now we're talking about 1980. It's only a decade later when John Anthony West starts to enter the picture in 90 and 91.
Yeah, and actually, you're absolutely right, because I met John Anthony West. I went to Boston University. I got my first and only job at Boston University, I suppose is the way to put it. I've been there ever since. I ended up there. I ended up at Boston University. I don't mean that in a belittling way. I love it. But I began in September 1984. I met John Anthony West in the late 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
First went to Egypt in 1990.
Right,
so
that's
we're
right.
Not talking a lot of, we're talking all these things happening within a decade.
At this point, between 84, 83, and up to before you met John, were you starting to have thoughts about our true timeline?
I think I was having thoughts about that even back in 1980-ish.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was. But a lot of that then goes back to my earlier childhood. And I mentioned before, I don't know how familiar you are or your audience is with theosophy, the genuine, when I say hardcore theosophy, my grandmother was a theosophist, and they had a very different timeline for humanity. I'm not saying I took that seriously, but at least it was something to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And I always took Plato pretty seriously as a great philosopher, and I remember thinking as a kid, well, if he was so great with his philosophy and ethics and concepts of government, etc., people take this guy so seriously, why is it that some people don't take Atlantis so seriously? I remember thinking about that as a little kid, not having it quite resolved in my head.
I have looked at the globe just like you have so many times, trying to find the best spot for Atlantis. It's just trying to figure that one out. Look, it can't be.
Yeah, but I don't want to say I've given up on that, but you and I have talked about this before. My view now is what's important is not the geographic location, but the timeline.
Yeah. We need to take a break right here, but what if Atlantis was Antarctica? Since we're talking about plate tectonics, let's take a break right here, Robert, and we'll be right back after this. Great conversation, but then again, we knew it because it's Dr. Robert Schoch. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. More with Robert after this break. Stay with us. You have just listened to a full hour free preview of Fade to Black. To get the full show, all archives, just go to our podcast section at jimmychurchradio.com. You can also sign up to be a Fadernaut in our membership area, where we have downloadable MP3s. Go to jimmychurchradio.com. Go Beckley Teppy.